Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. If you are a rising high school senior, this video is for you because we are going to be talking about how to make a resume for college applications. Before we talk about how to actually make your resume, we need to talk about why you need one because you're actually going to need it for a few different reasons during the course of your senior year. So one of the major reasons is for your college applications. Some colleges ask that you upload a resume, whereas others might have a text box where you have to type stuff in. Either way, if you have a resume made in advance, it makes that part of the application process go much more smoothly. Also, when you ask someone to write you a letter of recommendation, whether it is for a college application or a scholarship, it is usually customary to give them a resume as well. I can tell you that as a teacher, I appreciate it when a student does this because it reminds me of the different accomplishments that they've had outside of my class. So even though I'm speaking about them in terms of the type of student that they are, it's good to have that resume there for reference. So that would be another reason that you could need it. Also, if you are going on a college interview, it might be beneficial to bring one as well. And if you are thinking about applying for a job, it depends on what that job is, but some jobs might want a resume as well. You might take some of the info off because a job resume versus a college application resume are a little bit different, but it would be nice to at least have one already done. That way you can make those changes and just have it be a separate document. So there are several reasons why you need a resume, and it's usually good to start doing this either the summer before your senior year or relatively early on in the fall. So then the question becomes, how do I start? And there are two major approaches that I've seen my students do. Some of my students like to do what I would consider a brain dump. So usually what this means is they will identify the different categories on their resume, and then they will think of everything that they could possibly think of that applies to that category. From there, they either plug it into a template or they just organize it themselves to make it look nice in a typical resume format. Now, other students think that that is a bit unnecessary and they just like to go straight to the format or to the template and they just plug stuff in. So it really depends on which method works best for you. Speaking of templates, they tend to streamline the process, but not everybody likes to use one. There are several that are free online. Your guidance counselor might also have one, but you can just start from scratch and make your own. Regardless of whether or not you're using a template or you're making your own from scratch, it's going to be important that you follow a few basic guidelines. The first is that you want to choose a font and font size that are easy to read. You also want to be consistent with your formatting. So let's say that you decide to bold all of your headings. You want to make sure that you've done that consistently throughout because uniformity looks very aesthetically pleasing. It's also important to remember that if it says no more than one page, you don't want to actually have 2 pages. Generally speaking, a resume is 1 page. Admittedly, when it comes to resumes, I am a bit of a traditionalist. So I have seen some templates that use color or they use icons. And while I think that does look very nice and there is a time and a place for that, I'm not so sure that I would do it for a college application. So if you're considering that, I might just show it to your guidance counselor first before you actually submit it to a college or for a scholarship or something. Actually, regardless of what you do, I really do think you should submit it to your guidance counselor just for that final approval because you want to have another set of eyes on your resume. Now, one thing to keep in mind with resumes though is that you don't want to lie or exaggerate, but on the flip side, you don't want to be too humble. Sometimes students are very uncomfortable speaking about their accomplishments, and the resume is a way for you to do this. It's a way to be honest about what you've achieved, and that's not something to be ashamed of either. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to have basically a 1-page portrait of what you've accomplished over the course of your high school career. Something else that you might not be aware of is that for a resume, you want to actually list things in what we would call reverse chronological order. So this means that the newest or most current or ongoing activities are going to be first, and then the oldest are actually going to be at the bottom of your list. So what do you do if your resume is, let's say, a page and a half, but it needs to be 1 page? It's going to be tempting to want to have the font be even smaller or maybe to adjust the margins, but that's actually not the best thing to do. Instead, you want to actually look at your list and prioritize your best activities and awards. So whatever you think is the most impressive. So for instance, let's say that you were only in a club for 1 year, just freshman year, and that's it. Then that probably doesn't need to make the final draft of your resume if your resume is too long. Also, you might be able to combine certain things. So let's let's say that you earned all conference and all state honors in the same year. You might be able to put those as one entry instead of two entries. That way it saves you a little bit of space. So keep in mind that the idea is not necessarily to put everything you've done, but rather the best things that you've done. For some of the entries, you might actually need to give a bit more detail. So you might need to describe the award, or you might need to describe your involvement in the program. And usually this is done through bullet points. So you want to use very active verbs, but you also want to be as specific as possible. Also, it can be very helpful to have a family member help you brainstorm. Sometimes they might remember things that you have forgotten, especially about your freshman and sophomore year of high school. And also, sometimes it's helpful to have them look at your resume after you're totally done with it, because they might catch little typos, or they might be able to help you with formatting and things like that. So don't think that you have to do this totally on your own. I would also recommend showing it to your guidance counselor at some point too, because they are going to be experts in what colleges are looking for, and they can give you some additional pointers. So here is a list of the major categories that tend to be on a student's resume. Now, it's entirely possible that you might not have all of these categories, and that is absolutely fine. But what I want to do is just kind of very briefly go through each category. That way you know what is expected. So the first category is one that everybody is going to need to include, and that is your contact information. Now, you don't actually label it as contact information, you just put the info that you need. And this is going to go at the top of your resume. There are different ways to format it, but generally speaking, you need the following things. You're going to need your name, your address, your phone number, and an email address. And so for your name, it's important to remember that you're going to need to use the name that is on your application, so not a nickname. And also for an email address, you want to make sure that it is professional and also that it's your personal email. You don't want to use the email that your high school provides you with. On some resume templates, you might see something that says objective. Now, in my opinion, usually this is for either grad school or a job application, so I don't think it is absolutely necessary for this particular type of application. But if you want to include one, you are welcome to. The next section is education. And so for this one, you want to write out the complete name of your high school. Don't use abbreviations. Also remember that high school is two separate words. And you want to give the location. So this means the city and the state, not the actual street address. If you've been to more than one high school, list your most current high school first. Now for this section, sometimes students like to add additional info. They might like to add their weighted and unweighted GPA, they might like to add their class rank, or they might like to add their test scores. All of that information can be found elsewhere in your application, so I don't think it's entirely necessary to include it on your resume. So if you are trying to free up some space to include more activities, I would leave that off. Also, if your GPA or your test scores are not very impressive, I would leave that off as well. The next section is activities, or some students might actually label this as extracurricular. It's fine, it means the same thing. So these are going to be different things that you've done either in school or outside of school. So it could be clubs, it could be a youth group, it could be a sports team, things like that. You also want to include any leadership roles that you've had, and you want to be very specific about when you did it. So usually this means that you include the grade that you were in when you participated. And if you did it for multiple years, you would say something like grades 9 through 12. The next category is achievements. Some students might label this as honors/awards, also totally fine. And so this would include things like your honor roll, or maybe being in National Honor Society. It could be awards that you've won because you are an athlete, things like that. So any type of local or national recognition that you've earned during your high school career, whether it's academic or athletic, would go in this section. The next section would be work experience, and to be honest, sometimes students aren't able to participate in extracurricular activities because they work. And so if you have had a formal job, this is where you would list that employment. Some students actually label the category as employment, and that means the exact same thing as well. Now, let's say that you haven't had any formal employment. You can actually list informal opportunities as well, such as mowing lawns or even babysitting. You also might
might include a category for volunteer work, or you might label it as community service. So this would be things that you do voluntarily, not things that you get paid for. And you want to show some sort of long-term commitment. So it could be something like a week-long mission trip. It could be a weekly commitment if you're working at a soup kitchen or you're volunteering in some other way. You don't want to include something like a field trip where you went to a place for one day just for a few hours. The final category is one that not all students add. However, if you are fluent in a second language, you could add that under languages. Or there's also an opportunity to put different skills or courses you've taken. So if you did a summer program at a college, you might want to list it there. If you are proficient in, let's say, certain computer programming or different software, you might want to include that as well. Or you could simply include your interests. So things like playing the guitar or photography, things that might not show up elsewhere on your application, but still show something that you are interested in and therefore show a component of who you are.
So now that we've talked about what to include in a resume, let's talk about how to format one. So everybody's going to have a difference of opinion when it comes to aesthetics. So what I would recommend you do is to actually do an image search to figure out what you do and don't like. So for instance, I personally do actually like this format. I like the contact information being spread out across the top. And I like the different categories with the bullet points. So I might kind of note that way when I'm looking for a template, if I want to use one, I would try to find one that's similar. Or if I wanted to create it from scratch, even though this is just an image, I can sort of try to duplicate this. Now, as you click through the images, you might find ones like this. Like, I personally don't care for this format, so I would not want to use that as inspiration, but at least now I know something that I don't quite like. Now this one does look very professional, but I think it's a little bit too busy for the purposes of a college application. So I might not necessarily choose this one because it's not my aesthetic, but if it's something that you guys like, then absolutely you could just go for it. This one I like as well. This one looks kind of easy to read, very clean. This one, not my favorite because everything is centered. So now that you have an idea of what you do and don't like, then you can start to look for templates. Now your guidance counselor might actually have one that you would like to use as well, but if not, you can actually do an internet search. And one place that I like to go as far as recommending templates to students, at least as a starting point, is collegeessayguy.com. So he has 6 different templates here, and these, to be honest, are a really good starting point, but you need to actually click on these. So there are 6 of them. Let me show you guys the first one. And there are directions at the top that are going to tell you how to make your own copy of this. That way you can make it editable. And then you can change the font and obviously customize it to your own needs. So for instance, like this name right here, in my opinion, is a bit large. So I would probably size that down a bit on my own. And also you'll notice that there aren't very many categories on this one. So you might need to copy and paste and change a few things, like you might want to add additional entries or additional categories. But this would be a good starting point, and it's already pre-done for you. So we've got the headings here in all caps and bold if you like that. If not, you could change that. There's bold here. We've got some italics going on. So you kind of have to just look at it and decide what you do and don't like. And also this one, I will point out the years. Like, so for instance, instead of saying like grade 10, it says 2018. You want to be consistent. So if you would prefer to use the calendar year instead of like the grade that you were in school, that's fine, but don't go back and forth. Pick one or the other. And also for templates like this, there are things that you might choose to delete. For instance, you might not want your GPA or SAT and ACT information, either because you don't want to accentuate that or because you want that line in terms of the spacing for something else. So maybe you have a lot of activities and you need to free up a line of space. That could potentially go because that information will be in other parts of your application. So let me show you guys one more. This one is a bit different, but this is also from College Essay Guy. And so let me show you as I scroll down what this one looks like. Again, some of the font sizes on this I think are a bit too big, but this is a good starting point. So you could look at the different aesthetics and see which ones you like. And that way, if you like this, you could use the template. If not, you could at least use it as inspiration and create your own document and go from there.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful in explaining how to make a resume. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button, and also make sure that you are subscribed with your notifications turned on, because starting next week, we're going to be talking about how to write a college application essay, and you're not going to want to miss it. So until next time, guys, happy writing.